Let's face it, we all love this word, controversy, because we get a buzz from it. We want to understand the whys and the whens, ifs and so's. We want to engage, to debate, provoke, to make sense. So, why are these controversial?
There's something on my mind that has to be defined. At times it seems so clear when you are very near. The fire I feel inside, the urge I cannot hide. I've tried and tried and tried and
I found Bruce Gilden's work a long time ago. I could see the strength, the character, and depth of it, and while I could acknowledge this, I realized that many can't. That his photography simply just isn't for them. Many have criticized, in fact, Gilden for invading people's personal space, for being somewhat aggressive in his approach, for being exploitative as well. To that, I just have to say, different people will always react in different ways. But with Bruce Gilden, I learned of the importance of our third-party role in photography. We're the viewers, and we come in judging, thinking, analyzing according to who we are and what we've lived as a person. But that puts in question, how can we judge? How can we analyze people and scenarios we simply know nothing about? Isn't it all a case of either we like it or we don't? And if your answer is you don't, it possibly is a common reaction to seeing something you don't find visually appealing. Psychology has shown us that a negative first impression will inevitably lead to negative judgment and conclusions over something or someone, whether that is correct in the end of the situation or not. So with Bruce Gilden, we learn that the value of an image deep down lays on its first impression, and this first impression will impose the simplest of questions. Do you like it or you don't? I think it's time to travel to New York City in the 1940s. Gilden was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York in 1946, where he remembers experiencing the uncertainties and anxieties of teenage life, finding comfort in sports, watching wrestling, hanging out at boxing gyms. He was, quote, sucked in by the aggression and physicality of it all. And through a combination of this, with trying to find new things to dedicate himself to after dropping out of college, the bustling and increasingly dangerous environment of New York City, his shaky family situation, and characters like his father, who he described as thick grey-haired, cigars, pinky rings, and the look of "I'm going to knock you out in 2 seconds." It resulted, of course, in photography. And when he developed his first pictures, he realized he was hooked. Bruce Gilden would develop a style closer to what we've seen with Gary Winogrand. There's a focus on the realism of what they're photographing, real people, everyday situations, however normal or bizarre they might be. There's this isolation of beauty, I believe, in what most of us would probably walk past by and not notice or not care. And the New York streets of the 1970s and 80s, when Bruce Gilden achieved some notoriety, combined stress with anxiety and the typical shadiness and bizarre of megacities. His pictures showcased the archetypes of this era: the street hustlers, those who are beaten down, the bickering couple, the hard-knuckle mafioso, and Gilden was drawn to this almost on a daily basis. And combining this with being a taxi driver at the time, he had access to different sides of the city, to different situations, and he would take his camera and dive into the unknown, not really knowing what's to come around the corner, just pointing and shooting. However, there's a distinct quality about Bruce's work, and that is his use of flash, which in my opinion pushes the limits of the frame. And while we think we see more clearly with this flash of light, it adds another layer to the images, another layer of interest, of character, of strength, if you will. And that's one of the things I appreciate in his work. It's raw and focused on the authentic, and it's very much in your face. And about this, he said, "I'm known for taking pictures very close, and the older I get, the closer I get." Nevertheless, I think his early success doesn't just rely on the visual quality of his images. There is a certain aggressive, hyper-motivated attitude, a dogness, if you will, about his photographic work. When looking at his photos, these images are pushing forward and forward the invisible barriers photography might impose on us. How do we approach people? How do we capture with the camera what our eyes can see? So to me, each picture puts him closer and closer to his pursuit for authenticity of feelings or atmospheres, subjects, and imagery in itself. And on this, Gilden gave an interview where he talked about the importance of perseverance. He said, quote, "I think to be a good photographer, you don't need to be a genius, but you have to have an aptitude and a certain degree of talent. You have to persevere and you have to stay in course."
Ladies, please remain calm.
But it's hideous! Look at how it paints me. How it paints the family.
They're photographs, madam.
Photographs, you say?
From the picture box, madam?
Well, the picture box is damned, Mabel. Something is not quite right.
We must try another one, madam.
And where do you suppose we find a new one?
Madam, haven't you heard of MPB?
MPB?
They're merchants, my lady. They sell the finest and newest picture boxes, the finest picture box pouches, the sturdiest picture box tripods, and while we can buy from them, madam, we can also sell to them or trade one picture box for another, and in everything they offer us, 6 months warranty.
Are they of confidence, you say?
Well, it appears that people are quite satisfied, so they have shared it. Some talk about a greater customer service. Others of the great selection. Others are that talk about pricing.
Never mind pricing. If needs be, we shall raise the taxes. George, fetch the carriage. Tell the coachman we're heading to MPB.
And talking about course, Gilden's career eventually took a successful course of its own. And he started doing photography full-time, joining the prestigious Magnum Photos in 1998, where he began getting assignments for different nature projects. But all in all, we can recognize the traits of a Bruce Gilden picture. The chaos, the strength, the powerful expressions and gazes, the deep contrast created by the flash, and this sort of raw and genuine feeling. However, time brought significant changes to the landscapes, the people, the sounds and furies Bruce Gilden had been used to capture. To him, over time, places like the New York streets had lost a little bit of its shine. And since age had naturally dictated the adoption of a slower pace, he decided to put in practice ideas he had had for at least 20 years. And that involved doing more portrait work, and since he had always been especially influenced by mugshots, particularly early 20th century American mugshots, he decided to embrace different methods. And I say different methods because to me his intentions remain pretty much untouchable. The capture of what is authentic, what is there, and just like he had done before, capturing the scenes and details most of us would walk past and not blink an eye, he decided to turn his lens to capturing the people who are not only ignored but not even accounted for. And we can say these portraits fall under the tradition initiated by August Sander or Diane Arbus, photographers who focused their efforts on capturing people at the margins of society. However, it is the screaming pain and suffering, perhaps the rawness, if you will, of how these people are presented to us as an audience that to me brings forward one major lesson I learned with Bruce Gilden: that no one stands above anyone else. That as much as photographer and subject were there coexisting on that level, collaborating in these images, so have we, the viewers. And while I recognize that in his earlier work, this concept of hierarchy could definitely be questioned, there is no doubt when listening to Bruce Gilden in his interviews and podcasts that he has respect for the people he captures. And in his words, quote, "My people are all beautiful." And Gilden talks about the whole of his work as a result of following his intuition and thinking of a scene visually. And the importance of this relies on developing an acute sense for what the scene demands and on what level every subject is. According to his philosophy, every subject has its own level, and you as a photographer have to be smart enough to realize what that level is, and how you're going to capture that is why he has used different cameras over the course of his career, and while shooting and preferring primarily black and white, for instance, he understands the needs of the project and explores other means such as color, different flashes, and different formats. But his work, particularly the work he presented later in his career with books like Only God Can Judge Me, has been a source of tremendous controversy. But to better understand the motivation behind this particular project, I think we need to hear about its motivation. As I traveled through America, I noticed the same pattern in many cities. In all the bad areas, I saw white women, generally young, and at one time generally pretty, who were drug addicts, and I'm talking about serious H and C addicts. Many of them admitted they were sex workers, and in many instances they looked like a shell of themselves. This struck me very deeply, bringing back memories from my youth. In all of these women, I see my own mother, ravaged by pharmaceutical drugs, alcohol, and her own lifestyle. So I went to these areas where they hang out, and I started asking them if I could photograph them. This personal motivation is the genesis of my ongoing project, Only God Can Judge Me. I went back again to photograph some of these women recently, and I interviewed them. It's hard to imagine how much suffering and how little hope their stories contain. We ignore them, but they do exist and survive at the other end of the spectrum. So let's circle back to the word controversy. Why are these photos controversial? One can say subject, visual style, but I think it all boils down to context, or the lack of it. More than visual style, from what I could read, what moves critics is mostly the lack of context, because we don't know the motivation behind these photos, and these photos don't have, in the naked eye, any particularly likable attributes about them. These people aren't dressed nicely, they're not decently presented, according to our societal patterns, they represent real problems with real consequences that are very much in your face. So naturally, we might not like what we see, but the truth is that there's beauty in them. There's traces of human qualities. And they're nothing but the screaming, a very human screaming, if I may say, of the consequences of choices or perhaps of not standing a chance. And if anything, work like this shouldn't be perceived, in my opinion, as exploitative, but rather shining of a light in very real and persisting problems that take away many lives and destroy many, many families. And putting this in context of a society which increasingly becomes more and more worried with superficialities whilst also consuming anything and everything at high speed, it is this jarring impression an image can create that might make you stop and realize and analyze and see what has been standing in front of you this whole time. So in this particular concern, I respect the work of Bruce Gilden, for it has taught me a lot. But if it still doesn't speak to you, remember, we can't judge what we don't know, but rather, as humans, we should try and understand that said unknown. And in case you're religious, remember, only God can judge.
Only God can judge me, only God can. Only God can. Only God can judge me, only God can. Only God can judge. Only God can judge me, only God can. Yeah, yeah. Only God can judge. Only God can judge me, only God can. Yeah. Only God can judge. Goodbye, goodbye. Goodbye, homie, goodbye. It's been a hell of a ride, but now I'm learning to fly. Yeah, goodbye, goodbye, homie, goodbye. I gotta leave you behind, and I'ma let you know why. Look, I want a crown on my head. You want a do-rag. I'm trying to own the sneaker store. You want a shoe rock. We've been rapping together, dreaming together, but you're kinda rapping, and I'm trying to